Hello, everybody, and welcome to Encounters USA. I'm sitting here at the top of a mountain in Washington State, and I'm sitting here with Rich Germau, and we are going around and looking at some of the encounters that he's had. But Rich has got such a unique viewpoint, and he's got such a unique experience and skill set because he is a former law enforcement officer who reported these Bigfoot sightings while he was a uniformed officer. So the thing that we're going to talk about and what we're really leading into here, Rich, is we're talking about the missing 411 issue and David Paulides' books. And we'd just like to know, this is the first question I have, is that you worked as a law enforcement officer in a county where you personally had encountered one of these creatures. Actually, you worked in two different counties, two different law enforcement agencies. What was the reaction of your department and the local government in La Push, Washington, compared to Sequim? Now, if you haven't been watching the other videos, La Push, Washington is a Native American community. It's what we call a reservation. So how was your sightings treated differently, if they were?
They weren't treated differently. I mean, I don't think that anybody really took it seriously from a governmental standpoint, other than they probably, in closed doors, they probably joked about me. Other than that, and they'd say a few things when you're present, taking shots at you and stuff like that. But I don't think that there was any type of professional response or inquiry related to anything. In fact, there wasn't anything like that. I think it's a topic and a reality that's way above their heads in most part, and they don't have any knowledge, nor do most of them even believe that the existence is possible, I would suspect.
Okay, because we're looking at a number of different issues here. The first issue is, of course, public safety. Mm-hmm. And we, as I've said, we've got cases of missing people, and we're looking for suspects. And we got thousands of missing people, and we don't have any suspects. Some people, like David Paulides, kind of point you towards a Bigfoot possibly encounter, but he never tries to pin down that Bigfoot. But in the Olympic Mountains, where we're sitting right now, we know that there was a guy that went missing up in Solduck, which is about 100 miles as the crow flies to our northwest.
No, it's not even close to that far.
Okay.
It's probably only 20 miles from here.
Okay, yeah, because it's just straight over the mountains, but the mountains are impassable here, so you can't do that. And then there was somebody who, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there was a case, I believe it was here at Lake Cushman or near Lake Cushman, where somebody went missing.
No, there's been multiple missing persons around here all over the Olympics, and most of them sometimes are not found, sometimes they are. A lot of times the circumstances of their recovery doesn't make a lot of sense with their disappearance. A lot of times, dogs don't have any success in tracking. At least on a lower level with search and rescue and local law enforcement and whatnot, I would think that they have no idea related to the phenomena that occurs to these incidents, and they probably just chalk it up to they just don't know more than any times or not. I think it's a much higher level that may have knowledge of what's happening and maybe steering investigations to a degree or another, or limiting certain factors of it to maybe prohibit facts from being known, possibly.
Okay. But they're not going to, they don't have a suspect. In some cases, they don't have a person that has ever returned. The missing person's just gone.
Sometimes you never find them, yeah.
And they, in the David Paulides books, they're just written off as missing person. There's no crime, so there's just a missing person. Is it the same treatment here that you experienced in Mason County in Washington State?
I've never been involved in search and rescue, the program, in anywhere that I've worked, so I can't say definitively related to that. And I can tell you from the mindset of most police officers that they are not going to think that deeply to try to figure it out. And sure, obviously Bigfoot would be a suspect. I mean, it's a likely possible suspect, but there's no definitive proof to say that they are responsible or play any role.
That we know of?
That we know of, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, so that is really the politics of Bigfoot, and there's a lot more that goes into it. But as you know, you and I have both run for public office, and we both are aware that you're not going to keep a job in the public sector very long, especially if you have to go up for re-election, if you start talking about things that are not mainstream. And if you were to come out as a police officer and say, I think that we should look further into this Bigfoot area, what do you think the pushback from politicians would be?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, I was heavily involved in it, and I didn't keep it any secret. I didn't really care what anybody thought anyways. I don't think that it affected my work in any way, that I was being targeted or discriminated against because of my beliefs in that. I think that people would, maybe joke about me, but I was a credible person. I did my job well, and they couldn't argue with that. And in all other aspects of my life, I was pretty squared up, to where there wasn't any holes anywhere. I didn't have any problems anywhere in my life, but I did happen to have a couple of Bigfoot encounters that I could articulate very well, and I was very detailed about them. And so I don't think that they could question what I thought I was seeing. So, and I am credible. I was credible in a court of law during that time. I was considered that way, and obviously that I was telling people that I had Bigfoot encounters and I believed in these things and I had seen them hadn't affected my ability to testify in a court of law. They never revoked that from me.
Okay. So last question is this. When it comes to Bigfoot and local governments, and we're talking about small town governments. These aren't big cities here. These are small town governments with people that are up for election every 2 or 4 years. And my question to you, Rich, is just the considerations of you, as you saw as a law enforcement officer, are they practical considerations for public safety, or are they political?
What do you mean? Considerations.
Well, let's say that somebody comes up missing and we can't find any suspects. We can't find a body. We can't find anything. And you have somebody like you come in and say, well, we need to start looking at, I've got evidence. I've got lots of footprints. There are creatures up there, and there are people that have had encounters with it. So if you came to them with this story, what do you think their reaction is going to be, especially somebody that's up for re-election in a year or two?
Well, under any circumstances, I don't think they would consider any of that information. And I can tell you that in many of these missing person cases, a lot of the searchers and stuff have reported hearing knocks or finding stick structures or other things in proximity. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Bigfoots were responsible, but it does confirm the fact that in a lot of these places where people do go missing, that there is Bigfoot activity occurring at the same time, which may reflect other factors that may be related to the Bigfoot's existence in the area and the disappearance. It could have something to do with the location, and the Bigfoots are using it for the same reason as something else might be, or another phenomenon that exists that makes these people disappear. But it could have a direct relation to the Bigfoot's existence in the area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, and then the last thing I just want to add, and it's not really a question, but I just want to point out that we live in Washington State. This is the only state, I believe, I don't know if Oregon's done it, but where they've passed a law, I believe, down in Vancouver, that
County. It
is against the law to kill a Bigfoot. So obviously some politicians have taken up the cause, and I don't know. I don't know what politicians did. I don't know if that affected their political career, but it is something that people in Washington State, which is always a little bit odd, but have come up and have come out and said that, yeah, you can't go out and shoot one of these in the forest without being prosecuted. So somebody's obviously taking up the cause.
Well, and then can you really know for sure if that's a serious law, or was it just, done out of, appeasement or in a comical way?
Right.
It's hard to say. I mean, the law is on the books, but I don't think anybody shot a Bigfoot down there and been prosecuted that I know of.
Yeah. So I was going to actually do 2 videos on this, but we've got our classic Washington rain is coming in, and we just left one major rainstorm, so I think we're going to get another one very quickly. So we're just going to continue on with our topic, and that As a law enforcement officer, now you never had involvement with missing people, but were you at any time given any instructions about dealing with cryptids, aliens, anything that is out of the ordinary?
Nope, never had had an encounter or had to investigate any report like that on duty before. Nothing ever came out related to UFOs, Bigfoots, anything like that.
And no prior instructions?
Nope.
Okay, so what if somebody was to come to you with a report? What would your action be?
I document it, generally under a suspicious or unknown phenomenon categorization, and either enter it in the CAD system or write a report.
Okay. So you saw reports in the CAD system of the sighting that you had at Lake Cushman.
Or possible related reports.
Right, but they didn't say Bigfoot. They were prowler.
They were prowler, suspicious, things of that nature.
Okay, so officers took these reports, but they didn't come out and say this is a Bigfoot or a cryptid. They said this is a prowler and gave the description.
Basically, what they did, and this is what any officer would do in that circumstances, is they would go to a scene related to the complaint, generally near the time that it occurred, likely the same night. They would go out there, walk around, look at things with a flashlight, verify if there's any type of evidence left, and then they would take the eyewitness account through some sort of statement from the reporting party, and they would write a short note down and put in what the report was and what their findings were. And generally, I mean, they wouldn't have enough information to say that it's a Bigfoot report one way or the other, and generally that's probably not even they're thinking about. But I could go through looking at it from that perspective, looking for certain details, in the reports, and I could say, likely this is what this probably is. Because like when you're down a dirt road, when your neighbors are, half a mile away from each other, and you have somebody that happens to wake up to go to the bathroom at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they look out their window, and standing in their driveway is a really tall, dark figure that's abnormally large, and they're lit up by the moon from behind, and they call 911 because they have this huge dark figure that must be a black basketball player standing out there out in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m., and they look and it runs off into the brush. Or, they have a dark figure in their yard, they shine a light on him, and he's dressed all in black, and when they hit his eyes, it reflects an amber color back towards them. It makes me think, I've heard a lot of Bigfoot reports, read a lot, talked to a lot of witnesses before, and these descriptions match with a Bigfoot rather than a really excessively tall and big prowler that has reflective eyes, dressed all in black.
Yeah.
I'm able to find these reports and say, okay, I'm fairly certain of what this actually was. Is this misidentified by the witness? The cop doesn't know one way or another. He's just relaying the information as he was told it and as what he saw. And so it's a suspicious, unfounded complaint as far as he's concerned. It may not be unfounded, but it's suspicious in nature. And he's just relaying the information as he was told, and he has no investigative findings to go one way or the other on it.
All right. Now let's just go back to something you said, and you said that an officer will take the report and make the report, but you're aware of this Sasquatch encounter they have on Sasquatch Chronicles up in North Kitsap, which is what, I don't know how far away that would be, 50 miles from here, 30 miles?
Are you talking about the 911 call?
Yeah.
That was in the 90s. And I know that Ron Moore had interviewed that guy. He's the only person I know that has ever talked to him.
Yeah.
He came up from California to interview him.
Yeah, and the person, because you said, well, they will come and they will take the report. They'll take the report of a prowler. If somebody calls in for a Bigfoot, and that's what you hear on that call, is this guy doesn't want to say it's a Bigfoot because he knows they're not going to come.
And I'm sure the report was never taken as a Bigfoot either.
Yeah, but
his dog was killed, though.
Yeah, but through the whole thing, the guy is very careful not to say, I think it's a Bigfoot. Because that guy knows as soon as he says, I've got a Bigfoot, they're going to write him off as crazy, and they're not going to show up. Mm-hmm. So he says, just get out here. And I won't play the recording, but I'm sure most people have heard it. So do you know anything, do you have any other insights into that case? Why did the guy leave the property? Was it because of the Bigfoot, or was it something
Are you talking
else?
about the
in North
report up in
Kitsap?
Paulsbo? I have no idea. But okay. I heard that it was related to the Bigfoot incident.
Okay. And if you're not aware of it, a guy made a call to...
the dog killing happened prior to the 911 call.
Right. And he had taken thinking the guy's German Shepherd, the Bigfoot, had thrown it over his fence. And on the call, they asked if there'd been any prior activity. He said, "Yeah, he killed my dog." So that, but that got the police to come out. But my question is that if you
that was near Indianola,
yeah,
Kingston area.
Yep. And but my point in all this is that you say a policeman's going to come out and make a report of a prowler, but if you say that anything about it being a Bigfoot, I think the chances of anybody even showing up at your property are going to...
That's not entirely true. I think that they're going to respond and they're going to take the report as you wrote it, but it's not going to go anywhere beyond there. Actually, when I worked out in La Push, there was an encounter at Sappho where a person called 911 because they had a Bigfoot outside of it that was shaking their trailer back and forth. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife went out there to investigate, and county sheriff. And I talked to the deputies that went out and did it, and sure enough, there was handprints 10 feet up on the side of the trailer. That happened right near Beaver Lake. And that was before my encounter, actually, in La Push, probably about a year prior to that. And so they went out there and they looked, and they didn't know what to make of it. They assumed it was a bear. But we don't have that type of bear activity in this area, and especially bears that are that large. And it was shaking his trailer back and forth. I mean, It was moving it. And so, I mean, if the report comes in, they're going to respond, and they're not going to try and cover it up or anything like that. But it's not going to get any seriousness taken to it by anybody. There's not going to be any investigation launched into it. Nobody's going to go out looking for the perpetrator related to it. Because, I mean, even though in incidents like this where people do make these reports where they have suspicious sightings, they think it's a prowler, their trailer gets shook, whatever it may be, these are not really major crimes or low-level misdemeanors, if anything, that don't require any serious follow-up or investigation, and they have too much other important stuff to do rather than to invest time related to those things. But these type of reports are reoccurring throughout the country, and nothing really gets done about them because, well, why would anything really get done about it?
Okay, well, that pretty much answers my question, but I guess the moral of this story is if you got a problem with a Bigfoot, don't call the cops and tell them it's a Bigfoot. Just say it's a prowler. Just report what you see, report what's going on, but don't try to make any extrapolations into what it is because that could really limit the response, I think.
Well, possibly. I mean, they may label you if you say something like that right off the bat.
Right.
But they don't have any mechanism or any policy book, or they haven't been trained on anything related to that. So it's not in their wheelhouse. They are not cryptoid investigators or anything of that nature. They investigate true crime,
right.
And so it's and it's not to say that Bigfoot haven't been perpetrators of true crime, because likely they do steal things from people. Likely they might eat a person every now and again. I mean, there's no proof to say otherwise, and they are in proximity to many of these cases, likely, of missing people and other things that happen. And like I said, they have to be a suspect logically, but we can't say that they're responsible either.
All right, well, Rich, this has been such an enlightening experience. I really appreciate you taking the time out to appear on our podcast. And is there anything you'd like to add? You spend a lot of time in the woods out here in the Olympics. Is there anything you'd like to add, some advice for people that are out in the woods?
Be careful, be aware of your surroundings. Always follow your gut and listen to your instincts. It's there for a reason. And then go into the cover-up issue related to a government cover-up on this stuff. My impression of the whole thing is that it's happening on a much higher level. It's not that they're not aware. Many professionals have had encounters. In fact, Jeff Meldrum, who I used to talk to all the time, we used to be fairly good friends, especially when I was newly into this. I was consulting with him weekly. Told me a story of a guy that he knew in the 90s who was the lead scientist for Olympic National Park Service, and he oversaw all the biologists the field biologists that would go out there and gather data and everything on species and everything else. And in the Wainuchi drainage, he was hiking up there to research something, and he heard what he thought was elk coming down the ridge right towards him. So he thought that he was going to have a really close encounter with elk. And he got down in the bushes, and this thing walked by him close enough to reach his arm out and grab a hold of it. And he had 2 hairy legs with big feet that walked by him down the hill. And he's the lead scientist for an Olympic National Park. So you're going to tell me that when the lead scientist of Olympic National Park has a Class A Bigfoot sighting himself, yet the government is not acknowledging the existence. And he went on far to tell him that 3 of his employees that were all, biologists with bachelor's degrees at least, had Class A sightings themselves up in the interior Olympic National Park. Mm-hmm. And so it was a well-known thing, that there was this species that was out there, eyewitnessed by professionals who work for the Park Service. Mm-hmm. Yet it's not acknowledged, yet it's just the way it is. Yeah. Another story I can tell, John Mayasinski, who is used to be partners with Meldrum, he still is with the North American 8 Project, which was a really early Bigfoot research organization that started by Jeff Meldrum. Derek Randalls was a member in the early days of that. John Mayasinski was a government-contracted biologist for 30 years, and he researched grizzly bears in the lower 48, bighorn sheep, and mountain goats in the Wyoming and Colorado Rockies above 11,000 feet. And what he would do is go by himself, pack with goats, take in gear, and spend 3 to 4 months a year above 11,000 feet elevation. His first or second year, he was walking down a ridge, and he had an encounter. And he never told me this personally. I heard it third person. But I guess he reported the encounter, and he was told that if he wanted to keep getting government contracts, he wouldn't say anything more about it. And he's one of the world-renowned experts in grizzly bears. And he also had encounters with little people up at 11,000 feet area in the same region, where he would play what he called a music box. It looks like an accordion, but has less keys on it and smaller. And when he would sit around his fire at night, sometimes in certain locations, he would hear what he thought were like tiny voices around his campsite. He could hear people talking. And when he'd get up in the morning, he'd have hundreds of footprints, human footprints, that were like this big on the ground around where he was at. And the reason why I know that is because when I first met him was at the 2008 Yakima Bigfoot Roundup. Somebody told me to ask him after we'd been talking for a while what he thought of little people. And he looked at me and he told me that he thought the existence of little people was just as likely as the existence of Bigfoot, right? And I'm talking about little tiny human type people, which are in all of the native folklore and stories.
Well, there's a story, if you look on, I think it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime, but there's a story of the Bridgewater Triangle in New York.
I'm well aware of it, yeah.
And there's a guy that says that he's walking down the street and some little tiny man comes out and says, "Me mont moo," like that, right? And he said, I didn't know what I was, so I panicked, I ran. He says, this thing, and it was a tiny person, saying, and he said he was saying, "We want you," right? And I just wonder how many of these people that, like in the Politis accounts, are enticed by these, but look, they
don't ever resurface to tell the story.
Yeah, that's not. It's not in our litany. It's not in our Bigfoot category. So we're going to leave the little people alone for right now.
It's a related topic, likely though.
Yeah, because if we're looking for suspects for the 411, then that could be have something to do with it. And there are different accounts that kind of back or support that theory, and especially children walking off. Who would be more enticing to a child than a small person that looks like another child? All right, so you've opened up a can of worms, and I'm just going to have to jump into it, and then we're going to conclude this interview. But you started talking about Bigfoot DNA, and I've heard you on Sasquatch Chronicles talk about the Melba Ketchum DNA samples and how they appear to be half human female, and then half the DNA strand isn't even there. So, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, maybe I've just told everything.
Well, the findings in the DNA study, you'd have to read the Sasquatch Genome Project to really get a full picture of it. But I talked to her weekly during the study while it was going on. We were pretty close. We were still good friends. And so I was getting information related to the study as it was ongoing. And the DNA is very strange. Definitively, it shows that it's a hybrid, and that the event where this thing came into existence happened in multiple places relatively around the same time period. And they're able to know that based on the haplogroup through the mitochondrial DNA in the female lineage. And they can see when the actual events occurred based on that.
Okay, so we got to stop a second here. So you're talking about these things appeared simultaneously at different locations.
At different locations.
And the DNA says this.
Says it, yes.
So they could
because
be in
they
Africa
know that.
and the North American continent at the same time.
Well, most of the haplogroups come from Eastern Europe, a few from Africa, some from Asia, and a few from North America, but predominantly from Eastern Europe, around the Black Sea area, Caucasus Mountains. Is where it started. And the way that they knew this is because the human population experienced a bottleneck around 12 to 20,000 years ago, where the population got really small, possibly down to around 2,000 individuals that were spread out around numerous small tribes in these locations. And that's when this incident occurred, where the male side of this came in, mated with human females, and the offspring happens to be the Sasquatch. And there is some variance in the DNA between the different samples. And from what I remember, the samples ranged from somewhere in the 70% range of modern human up into the 90s. And she suspected that was due to ongoing cross inbreeding between modern humans and these things after the initial event. And at some period of time, this crossbreeding stopped. Mm-hmm. And yeah, in the DNA visually, when they ran the profiles, and this was beyond any contamination or damage to DNA profiles because they knew that they were pristine when they had done everything to them. They saw certain sections of the DNA which they couldn't make heads or tails of, to where a DNA strand is a double helix that's got two strands that spiral with bars in between. And when they looked at it under the microscope, they could see that part of the DNA, one half of the helix with the bars was pristine, but the strand on the other side was missing. And it was just in certain sections of the DNA. It wasn't like half of it or anything like that. It was just parts that were not there. They weren't visually able to be seen. And they never found any proof of why that would be. But that study was $500,000. Identified 111 individual Sasquatches, from my understanding, and they did 3 complete genomes, that were around $10,000 a piece.
Yeah.
So they've actually mapped this DNA as definitively and as far as they've done modern human or Neanderthal. And then we tried to enter it to publish a paper, and through Nature initially, and we were in perpetual peer review for a year and a half, where they leaked information out on it. They tried to discredit her. The study itself was a blind study by multiple labs that were testing samples that they had no idea what they were. They all came up with the same findings. Mm-hmm.
All right, can I stop you right there? Because my first question is, what did they expect to find? Because I've seen like you talked about Jeff Meldrum, when they went up to that lake in Canada and they had DNA from the nails on the carpet that was in front of the door. Every time they send this stuff to a lab, it comes back inconclusive.
No, it comes back
or it's
human.
A bear, but it's never.
It always. The Snellgrove Lake came back human, and many other ones that he did. Meldrum told me a story one time when I was talking to him on the phone. He said he took an immediate flight to Minnesota for a report that a guy that he knew had gotten. Where a Bigfoot allegedly had walked up onto a guy's back porch in the snow, broke a light bulb, bled on the porch, walked off of it, took a piss, and then left. Right? So they had blood DNA, and they had urine, and they had huge footprints to show what had left it. Mm-hmm. He thought that they were going to run this DNA, and they were going to be holding a press release, and the DNA came back human. Right? So he said it must have been contamination. Right? Yet we did this whole entire study, and it always comes back human when you test mitochondrial DNA, right? Because these things are almost exactly the same as us through DNA. There's very little variance. Just like all these hominin species are going to come back. A chimpanzee is like 97% human.
Yeah, but I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, although I am, but I really suspect that what happened in Dr. Ketchum's case was when you send this stuff into a lab, this is science. These are university researchers. These are people who have credentials based upon their studies, based upon their work. They come out one time and say there's Bigfoot, and that's the end of their career. Look what happened to Melba.
Well, no, they do. They knew when they were testing this stuff, they were getting the findings, and they were calling her on the phone. What is this? This is a new species. Mm-hmm. They knew right away, and she ended up telling a lot of them it was a remote tribe, so they would kind of just not be, asking too many questions, because she did actually come out and tell a couple of them, and they canceled all of their research. They stopped, when she told them what it was. But to get back to it, we tried to publish it through different scientific journals. They wouldn't publish it, right? It's been looked at by other geneticists who have confirmed it. We tried to enter the sample in GenBank, which is an international database for new species. Mm-hmm. This is a new species. They would not allow her to enter it in GenBank. They would not let her upload it. Because
reason?
GenBank, no, they just wouldn't let her do it. Because when you enter a new species in GenBank, the reason why it's there is because when other people get unknown samples, they can enter it into GenBank and it can get a match. And then you have another hit, right? Well, if it's not in there, then when somebody puts in a new sample that's the same thing, they won't get a match. We had a match. We tried to put it in. They wouldn't allow it to be entered.
All right, last question. I promise, the last question. I've heard in these encounters with or these researchers, and I don't remember the name of him, but there's a guy researching down around Mount Shasta, and he says that during the mining during the California Gold Rush, that they brought in a lot of Chinese. And that some of these Chinese women were abducted. And there were thousands of Chinese in Northern California. And that some of them had been abducted by these Bigfoots and had produced offspring. Have you ever heard this?
No, I've never heard this before.
It's very interesting. And so he says that you have basically two groups. And this is something that you might want to look into and might explain the mitochondrial DNA being from a female. Is that he seems to, or these researchers seem to think that there's these big ones, the 10-foot tall ones. These are the masters of the woods, and they abduct women, whatever, and they have offspring. And what you're seeing in most cases, you're not seeing the big ones. You're seeing these humanized, these hybrids. And so I don't know if it's true or not, but this guy seems to think that there is evidence that these are actually Chinese, kind of Chinese, hybrids from these Bigfoot, from these big 10-foot tall Bigfoots. So whether that's true or not, and he also says that Patty is in the Gimlin Patterson film. He seems to think that that's one of these hybrids.
I wouldn't know anything about that. I've never heard that before.
So, and you know what? Well, anyway, so that's another in the DNA mystery.
We didn't see anything in the DNA anything to reflect that.
Yeah, and so when you're discussing this topic, you can get into all different kinds of areas, and you have to be careful. But what we're looking at is we're not going to discount anything, because we're looking at all the evidence, and we're looking for things that are similar in one occurrence. We're looking for the similarities in creatures, and whatever we can find things that go together, then that's what we're going to look at. If it's not true, if it doesn't make any sense, then we'll throw it out. But Rich, everything you've told us today has been just amazing, and we've had people remote view. We're going to remote view some more of the locations that we're looking at, and we're going to get back to you. So it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rich. And I guess with that, from the top of some mountain in the Olympic Peninsula, we're looking down at the Hood Canal. This is Matthew Hines for Encounters USA, and I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel. Rich, do you have any, like a website or anything where people can contact you for your business or anything
No.
like that?
Facebook page, that's it.
All right. Well, check out Rich on his Facebook page, and I'll leave those details in the comment section on YouTube. All right, you guys. Well, thanks for stopping by, and thanks for listening and watching this this podcast and YouTube video. And so we'll just have to ask you, when you're out in the woods, especially if you're in the Olympic Peninsula and you're by yourself or you're with Rich Germau, always watch your back.